Good morning, friends. I'm Dr. Michelle. This is Swami Devaki, and it's a joy to be with you this morning. I'm going to start with reading from Rays from the One Light. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This week's title is How High Should We Aspire? The passage this week is from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 5. I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. The easiest explanation for these words is that they were spoken in criticism of the scribes and Pharisees, particularly since Jesus was often verbally attacked by them and stood up to them fearlessly. However, it wouldn't have been much of a challenge to the disciples who aspired to spiritual perfection to tell them, don't be like those who lack any such aspiration. Jesus, in fact, says only a few verses later, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. What Jesus was referring to here then was the self-righteousness of the priests. Don't seek perfection, he was saying to his disciples, in the image you project outward to others. Don't be satisfied with a goodness born merely of ego definitions. The highest virtue is to transcend the very thought of personal virtue in the realization of God alone as the doer. Before this realization, even the thought, I am kind or I am truthful, is self-limiting. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita in the 7th chapter, yet hard the wise Mahatma is to find that man who saith, all is Vasudev. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. This question that Swami Kriyananda gives us in our reading this morning, how high should we aspire, I think is a very important one, particularly as I meditated on this past week. And the answer that came to me is the following. Yogananda said at a Kriya initiation that through the practice of Kriya Yoga, we should hope to become at least Jivan Muktas in this lifetime. And Yogananda writes, Swami Kriyananda writes elsewhere that at the very first Kriya initiation that he attended, that Yogananda gave, he said that there were in that room several who would become siddhas, perfected beings, and quite a few who would become Jivan Muktas. So this is attainable. Now, some of you are wondering, what is a Jivan Mukta? As we progress on the spiritual path, as the teachings say, we have an initial experience of cosmic consciousness, of God realization, of samadhi, if you will. And typically that comes in meditation. And that's not the end. That's just a fleeting experience. And as we continue to progress on the path, we have that experience more and more often, realizing that as our true nature. And initially, that experience may only come in meditation when we're completely absorbed in God. It's a state known as Salvikalpa Samadhi. But eventually, as we continue to become identified more and more with that consciousness and realize that as our true self, we can move through our waking lives in that state continuously, that state which is called nirvikalpa samadhi. And when we reach that state, we are free. We are free of the bondage of ego. We may not be free from all karma, but we're free of the bondage of that karma. And we no more can fall back into ignorance and delusion. And that is the state of Jivan Mukta. And that, Yogananda said, we can all hope to achieve through practice of Kriya Yoga. Now, I don't know about you, but that may feel a bit like a stretch. And I want to offer some additional perspectives because I do think we should all develop the mindset that that is possible for us. And as I was thinking about this, we have learned a lot in the last few decades in the psychology and social science literature about how mindset impacts our lives and our potential. And there's a lot of research that has shown now that what we think as possible for ourselves, what we believe about ourselves, creates our own reality. There's a psychologist, Carol Dweck, who has done some really groundbreaking work. And she started several decades ago studying children and watching them. And what she observed in her studies of children, she described two different mindsets that these children had. One she called a growth mindset. These were kids who loved challenge. You gave them a challenge, and they just sort of embraced it. They weren't afraid of failure. They saw it as a learning opportunity. And they saw self-effort as a path to mastery. And then there were the children who had what she called a fixed mindset. And for these children, it was more important to look smart than to actually learn something. Perhaps somewhat reminiscent of our scribes and Pharisees, right? The outer sort of display. Right? And they actually didn't like challenges. They didn't like failure. If you gave them a math problem they couldn't solve, they were so set back by it that they couldn't even solve math problems that they previously knew. It took them a while to sort of recover. And so they developed this tendency to not push themselves or try new things because failure's not good. And either I know it or I don't. And it had this very sort of deterministic mindset. And what Dr. Dweck discovered was that kids with the growth mindset did better academically. They were more successful in their lives overall than the children who had the fixed mindset. Now, were the children with the fixed mindset stuck there? No. She also found in her research that there were ways that you could train these children who had a fixed mindset to develop more of a growth mindset. And those kids went on to do better. Early in my 20s, before I came to this path, but early on in my spiritual explorations, I was studying with another teacher, and she said to me one day, Michelle, you could make it this lifetime, you know. And I was kind of, whoa, really? Really? And what I realized now in retrospect was that hearing someone tell me that helped me to become more serious about my spiritual life. Because it put out this possibility, and having a growth mindset, all I have to do is work toward that. And so I think it helped me to be more serious about my spiritual life, to put more effort into it, to really commit to a daily meditation practice. And I've noticed in many other areas of my life that I have a tendency to sort of set high goals. And some of you who know me will acknowledge that. And even though I may not always achieve them, I go much farther because I've set that as a goal and because I've put in the self-effort to work toward that. If I didn't set it as a goal, I wouldn't put any effort there and I wouldn't make any progress toward that. Okay, so you're saying, wait, I'm nowhere close to Jivan Mukta. Why should I even think about this? Well, you know, we talked a few weeks ago about the fact that we are children of the light. And I want to share with you a story that Yogananda used to tell. And it's a story about a lion who thought he was a sheep. Now, how did this happen? Well, there was a lioness, and she was very heavy with a lion cub, very, very pregnant. And she was so exhausted because she was famished, because she couldn't run at her usual speed and catch prey. And so she was very hungry and very tired carrying this heavy lion cub that she was just about ready to give birth to. And she fell asleep in a field and had a dream. And in this dream, she was in a field filled with sheep. And she woke up startled, and she was in a field surrounded by sheep. And so she leapt and pounced and grabbed the sheep that was closest to her and sort of drug it off into the forest and began to eat. She was just mad with hunger. And she was so mad with hunger that she didn't realize that when she leapt to catch the sheep, she gave birth to a baby lion. So the flock of sheep were just stunned, in total shock. And when they finally, so they didn't run away. They were just frozen in fear. And when finally they began to sort of come to their senses and realize that one of their own had been carried off and that, oh my goodness, there was this baby lion cub in their midst. And one of the mother sheep had great compassion and took this baby lion cub as her own and nursed it and helped to raise it. And so this baby lion cub grew up in a flock of sheep. It learned to bleat like the sheep and ate grass like the sheep and thought it was a sheep. And so it grew up and went through its life with the flock of sheep, you know, pausing and nipping the grass and bleating and carrying on. Well, one day, a lion saw this flock of sheep with the lion, and it's like, there's my dinner. And so this other lion now started chasing the flock. But what this lion noticed, to his surprise, was that at the front of the flock, racing ahead of them, was another lion running away from him. And he just like, this is bizarre. What is going on here? And so he decided to sort of put his dinner aside and go run after this lion at the front of the flock. And so finally he catches up to him and he sort of grabs him and, knocks him with the head. And he's like, what are you doing, brother? You're a lion like me. Why are you running from me? And the lion, who grew up like a sheep, is like, please don't hurt me. Leave me alone, let me go, please. And the lion's like, come on, you're a lion. He's like, no, I'm a sheep, let me go. And gradually this lion begins to realize what's going on here. And so he grabbed the younger lion by the mane and pulled him over to a nearby pond and started shaking him, trying to shake some sense into him. And he said, you are a lion, look in the water. And finally, this little weak, cowardly little lion sort of, finally he opens his eyes and he looks in the water and he sees his reflection. And he sees the reflection of the lion next to him, and he starts to realize who and what he really is. And the older lion says, that's it. See, you're a lion. Now roar like a lion. And the younger lion goes, But gradually he sort of keeps at it and discovers his roar. Now, I think you all can kind of get the moral of this story, but I want to read to you what Yogananda said. The above story aptly illustrates how most of us, though made in the image of the all-powerful divine lion of the universe, have been born and brought up in the sheepfold of mortal weakness. We bleat with fear, lack, and death, instead of roaring with immortality and power. My friends, we are all divine lions. We should hope to become Jivan Muktas in this lifetime. Yogananda, when he was in Seattle, met a woman who was 80 years old, who had been an atheist her entire life. And she was so profoundly changed by that meeting. She started meditating every day, and when she wasn't meditating, she played Yogananda's voice in her home. And one of those things that she played over and over again was Yogananda reciting his poem, God, God, God. And after our offertory today, Chaitanya is going to sing Swami Kriyananda's version of that poem put to music. And she kept orange flowers in a vase on her altar as a memory of that meeting. And she only lived for a few years after their meeting. But Yogananda said she became liberated in this lifetime. Only a few years. It's not about how long we've been on the path. It's not about what we're doing on the outside. It was the intensity of her devotion, of her practice, and her inner connection that brought her liberation so quickly. And so, to get back to our reading here, when Jesus is admonishing the disciples, what he's telling them is, it's not about trying to look good on the outside. It's not about doing all the orthodox parts of religion and all the ceremony and that, which is all good. There's nothing wrong with that. But what he's telling them is that your righteousness has to exceed that. It has to go beyond that into an inner yearning, an inner worship, an inner devotion. And all the outer ritual and symbolism is only useful to the extent that it helps to awaken that devotion within us and helps to take us into that inner experience, that inner relationship and connection. And I think if maybe I listened to God, Yogananda say, reciting God, God, God every day over and over and over again, that would change my consciousness. And that would probably help awaken that and speed that transformation. You know, we see our own faults and foibles, but that's not what Divine Mother sees. She sees the heart. And that's really when she sees, when God sees that really all we want is Him, all we want is her, as we say in the festival every week. We want God with all our hearts, all our minds, all our souls, all our strength. When we choose that love, then Divine Mother comes. And she brings that grace, that power that helps us to overcome the obstacles in our lives, that insight and guidance that we need, and that inner solace, that comfort, and that joy. And even if you just have a moment of that divine joy, treasure it, cultivate it, remember it, because that experience is who we are. That is what we are aspiring to. That is what will remind us that we are indeed divine lions and not sheep bleeding our way through this planet. I want to end with this quote from Autobiography of a Yogi. This is Ram Gopal Muzumdar, the sleepless saint, telling the boy Yogananda, and I think Yogananda, talking to the boy Yogananda, and I think Yogananda included this because he wanted all of us to realize this too. So Ram Gopal says, "Do not fix your spiritual ideal on a small mountain, but hitch it to the star of unqualified divine attainment. If you work hard, you will get there." Bless you all, my friends, on your spiritual quest.